Hello, my noble band of outlaws. Outlaw Samurai coming at you live with a video. First thing you may have noticed is I added this cool little tassel to the end of my crane sword. But that's not what I wanted to talk about. Now, over the past couple of days, I've been watching videos over the Yautja. And for those of you who don't know what a Yautja is, it's the Predators from the Predator movies. And I've learned of their hierarchy, the blooded, the unblooded, the elders, the clan leaders, all that stuff. Don't remember half of it, but still. And I thought since this is a channel predominantly dominated with sword talks and sword information, I thought I'd talk about what kind of swords would the Yautja use if they chose to use a sword. Now, granted, they do use a type of sword. They use wrist blades. And there is an actual sword from history that had a metal gauntlet that you wore from, that I think extended from your elbow joint or slightly above your elbow to the base of your knuckle, and then a sword blade would sprout out from that. But that's an actual historical sword. Shadiversity, he did a video on that. It's called the Gauntlet Sword. I suggest checking that out if you want to learn more about that. Just a minute. Sorry about that. But as I was saying, what kind of swords would a Yautja use, or a Predator? I'm going to be using those terms interchangeably, so try to keep up. If you can. I'm sorry if I talk too fast or anything. I'm not trying to be an asshole. In any case, with that in mind, we've seen the Predators fight many times. We've seen them fight xenomorphs, and we've seen them fight humans. We've seen their wrist blades in action. Now, there's a few different kinds of Predator wrist blade. There's the standard wrist blade that we see on the hunters. Those are kind of the more slimmer built ones. The Super Predators, which are kind of like the bigger ones, like the movie Predators, that one with all the red on his face when he took his mask off and the huge mandibles. That's a Super Predator, and I think they prefer to use a single-bladed gauntlet. And the single-bladed ones are also attributed to the Bad Bloods, the ones who have broken the Yautja Code of Honor and the Code of the Hunt. Yes, Predators have a Code of Honor. You can look it up on YouTube. I think the video is called Films and Comics Explained, Predator Honor System or Code. But aside from that, the Bad Bloods, just like the Super Predators, seem to prefer a single-handed wrist blade. And then in AVP, there's this, the wrist blade that one of the Predators use that has a double extension to double the length of the blade. Now, some Yautja, they're very honorable. They prefer melee combat. Most Yautja do. But some Yautja, they choose to perfect using the wrist blade so much that they don't use the classic plasma arm cannon thing. Now, with that in mind, if the Yautja, I would think that the wrist blades are the Yautja's version of a sword. But with that in mind, it brings me to my topic. What kind of sword would a Yautja feel most comfortable using? And if the filming is a little dark, I mean, it looks dark at the screen that I'm facing at, but if it looks dark, it's just because the sun's behind me. I think. Or the sun is that way. But, in any case, with that in mind, the Yautja, I believe those are their swords, but if they had to use earth swords, which would they use? Now, I'm sure a lot of you've seen there's also a couple of fan films. Batman Dead End is a fan film where Batman fights the Predator, And Big Red makes his appearance, the samurai Predator with the katana. And then there's Predator's Dark Ages. That's like a half-hour fan film where Templar Knights go and fight a Predator along with a Muslim soldier or Islamic soldier. It's from the time of the Crusades, so I'm not exactly an expert on the religious aspects of that time period. But I can tell you that he looks Islamic in origin, or at least he's supposed to be. But in any case, with that in mind, continuing on, the Predators, you have to admit, I keep bringing this up, what kind of sword would they use? And I'm going to get to that right now, in fact. Whenever a truck goes by, it gets hard to talk, so I usually just tend to wait till they zip past. But, before we get into what kind of sword they would use, we have to get into the build of a Predator. Now, for my analysis, I'm just going to use the standard Predator, and, it's not all that different. Now, for my analysis, I'm going to be using the standard Predator size. And what I mean by that is I'm not going to use the Super Predators, which stand about 8 feet tall. And I'm not going to be using the Ultimate Predator from the 2018 movie. That motherfucker stands about 8 feet tall and can basically use whatever kind of sword he wanted. Okay, I think the Ultimate Predator could even kill fucking Jason Voorhees. Okay, so I'm going to avoid those guys and just use the standard Predator. Okay, so the standard Predator, the Yautja, is roughly 7 feet tall. I want to say weigh approximately 300 pounds. And in terms of power, I want to say at least he's twice as fast and twice as strong as a normal human. Like, a human at peak physical... can't talk. A human that has reached the absolute peak of physical ability for our species can actually take down a Predator. We've seen this in Predator 1 when he fights Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, you're putting a Predator up against the fucking Terminator and Conan. He plays both those characters. You put him up against a fucking barbarian Terminator. Yeah, you're gonna lose if you're gonna fight Arnold Schwarzenegger in the jungle, because that dude, he puts Rambo to shame. In my opinion. Never seen a Rambo movie, seen enough clips. My opinion, based on the knowledge I have. But aside from that, and then we've seen it in Predator 2 when the LAPD cop killed them, and by the way, it's actually part of the Predator honor code that when you kill a Predator, another Predator of his clan or his faction gives you a gift as a show of mercy and respect. That's why he got that flintlock. That's why the LAPD dude got the flintlock pistol at the end of the Predator movie. Now, with that in mind, you've heard me bitch and mamble enough, so I'm going to get into the actual discussion here. So, we have the Predator. He's 7 foot tall, 300 pounds, twice as strong as a normal human. So, what sword, or swords, plural, would he use? Now, a lot of you are going to be saying, oh, he's gonna say the katana because he's a major goober for the katana. I will admit the katana, seeing a Predator use that in an actual movie would be badass. Like maybe a Predator-ish katana, where it's like they take the classic katana design and then Predator it up. Hashtag Predator up. But in any case, with that in mind, in my humble opinion, I don't really necessarily see a Predator using a katana unless it's dual wielding, and here's why. The katana, in essence, is a relatively small sword compared to other swords from across the world. I mean, yeah, it's a phenomenal cutter, and I can easily see a Predator utilizing this, especially against Xenomorphs, because of the fact that a katana is basically stupid-proof. A katana, to an extent, is basically stupid-proof. And you're probably wondering what I mean by stupid-proof. Well, I mean that in the sense that when you cut with a sword, say I was going to cut this scabbard, and I come in like this. Now, that's this perfect edge alignment and everything, but what if I come in like this? Well, my edge is deflected a bit. Whereas, like, my blade is going this way, but my edge is going straight down. The katana, more times than not, can generally auto-correct itself in the cut and force its way through. Which is why the katana is renowned as such a phenomenal cutter. It's stupid-proof. And why a lot of people, whenever, I think even in HEMA schools, which teach historical European martial arts, they give the students katanas to learn the basics of cutting, because they can basically screw up a little bit and it's not going to destroy the sword as much as a long sword. Now, I don't mean to say that the long sword is a weaker blade by any means. They're both very respectable swords. It's just that the long sword tend to be forged longer and has a thinner, more flexible blade than the katana's relatively shorter, stouter blade. So with that in mind, that's why I'm saying that the Yautja, while it would be badass to see them use a katana, I can't see them using the katana except for a dual-wielding purpose. And you're probably wondering, why is that? Well, it comes down to the fact that they can use it. It would be more advantageous for them to use two swords instead of one, for the simple fact that when you're using a katana one-handed, your whole arm is taking the weight of the sword. That's why katanas are generally used that's why they're generally two-handed swords. But also, for the simple fact that the katana actually has a relatively short blade for what could be considered a long sword, in my opinion, but that's beside the point. What I'm trying to get at is that humans, whenever we dual-wield weapons, we tend to use one long weapon and one shorter weapon. The longer weapon tends to be held in our dominant hand, while the shorter weapon tends to be used in the non-dominant. Just like in sword and dagger in European sword schools. They have the rapier, and then they have a little parrying dagger that looks like a scythe. And the rapier is held in the dominant hand, and the parrying dagger with like little teeth like this are held in the non-dominant to, as it states, parry the blade. Now, keeping in mind that a Yautja is twice as strong as a normal human, if that's their bare minimum of strength, that any weapon that a human has to use two-handed, a Yautja could wield one-handed. Getting rid of a spider. But in any case, so that means that in a sword fight, you can actually dual-wield katana. Like, the katana, its blade, in my case, my katana sword, the blade of my sword is short enough that it could be considered a one-handed sword, and I can one-hand use it. Can't talk. I can use it comfortably in one hand, but if I want more control and more power, I have to use it two-handed. There's also the matter of fatigue. when you're fatigued, you tend to not be able to fight as effectively. Now, given the mind that the predators are bigger and stronger than us, most likely they also have higher quotients of stamina. They also probably have greater stamina than us. So by the time a human arm is fatigued enough that it can no longer wield a blade one-handed and has to use two hands, a Yautja arm can still use the one-handed sword grip. This is why I see a Yautja using a katana in a dual-wielded sense, because of their ability to not only use the sword for longer periods of time without tiring, but also for their pure physical strength, that when they cut something in their one arm, one Yautja arm has the strength of two human arms. So when a human cuts like this with both their arms at full power, a Yautja only needs one arm. So a Yautja dual wielding a grip, that would be the equivalent of two humans swinging one sword. So with that in mind, that's why I can't see Yautja wielding a katana unless it's in a dual-wielded sense, because of their strength and abilities. Now, does that mean it's the same for European swords? I would say no, but I'm getting to that. Now, if you wanted to know a Oriental sword that I feel that a Yautja would have to use two-handed, then it would either be the Tachi or the Nodachi from Japan. Like, I'm just going to be using Japanese swords and European swords for this analysis because those are the swords that I know the most of. So, now, a Tachi, I bet we've all seen them online. They're like 40 inches long. They're no different than a katana, except they're curved more. And instead of wearing them on your hip with the blade facing up, you wear them with the blade facing down. I'm here to tell you that traditional Tachi are a lot different than katana, for the simple fact that a Tachi should be longer than a katana. Like, in my opinion, a katana should be anywhere from 40 to 45 inches long. That's a katana length for me. A Tachi would be anywhere from 46 to 50 inches long. And then a Nodachi anywhere from 50 to 60, and an Odachi anywhere from 60 to 70, in my opinion. So, with that in mind, let's add another maybe 8 inches to this sword overall. So this sword has an extra 8 inches on it. That would make it a Tachi. Now, that would probably be about 4 inches of blade and another 4 inches of grip, making this thing like maybe in my opinion, it'd be, a Tachi should have like a 36-inch blade, counting the habaki, by the way, 35 without, because you don't count the habaki, and a 14-inch grip. Make it 50 inches perfect overall. But with that in mind, because of the longer blade and its size, I would even think a Yautja would not be able to easily single-handedly wield a Tachi. In my opinion, the Tachi, which is much closer to the European longsword, by the way, than the katana, if we're going to compare these two, the katana is closer to the one-handed arming sword in length and handling than it is to the longsword. And the Tachi is closer to the longsword than any other Oriental blade, in my opinion. I don't know about Chinese Jan or Dao or anything like that. But what I would see is that the Tachi, even the Yaucha, would have to wield those things two-handed, or at least they could wield it one-handed for a time, and then when their arms start to fatigue, then they can switch to a two-handed grip. Of course, give in mind that the Yaucha, their metallurgy is far superior to the human metallurgy. I'm basing my analysis off of human steel weapons. I would imagine that the Yaucha weapons are far stronger and half the weight. So with that in mind, I really do think that if the Yaucha would use human steel weapons, then the Tachi would definitely be a two-handed sword for them to use. And they would not be able to easily dual-wield it. They would not be able to easily wield it one-handed. Now the Nodachi, on the other hand, that's an even bigger sword, and I really do not see a Yaucha being able to swing around a Nodachi one-handed very long. I think that would be a dedicated two-handed sword for them. And with that in mind, I can actually see a Yaucha using a Nodachi or a Tachi and very much easily be able to wield them just as effectively as any human swordsman. Maybe a little more effectively because they're bigger and they would generally have longer arms. And with longer arms comes the ability to draw a longer blade from the hip quicker and easier. But with that in mind, you've heard me ramble on about Oriental swords enough. What about the European swords? So, in conclusion of my Oriental swords, the swords I could see a Yaucha using from Japanese culture are the katana, dual-wielded, or single-wielded if the Yaucha has a wrist blade, which generally they do. But primarily dual-wielded. The Tachi, maybe dual-wielded, but majorly single-handed. Maybe dual-wielded, but predominantly double-handed. And that means two hands on the grip, but aside from that. And the Tachi, very, very little one-handed use, if any. Like, maybe if he has a bad swing, he could let go of the bottom of the grip and use the momentum of the sword to bring it back up and use the weight to chop down. Like, say I had a bad swing, I could just use the momentum of the swing. I could just use the momentum of the swing and the rotation of my wrist and arm to bring it back down and chop you in the head. That's what I could see a Yaucha doing. And hold on a moment. Oh, I need to get my coffee. It's cold out here. Alright, so with that in mind, what European swords would I recommend for a Yaucha? Now I'm going to be doing the same thing. European arming swords. They are the one-handed swords. Predominantly you see them in night movies, or the one-handed swords. I could see Yaucha using them, but just as like the katana, I could see them using them in a dual-wielded purpose. But that would be the case with them. Now, European swords, I can actually see them using more because there's more of a variety. But in any case, European arming swords, the European long sword, definitely. Now, you're probably going to be saying, is it going to be the same thing as the Tachi? Well, yes and no. Because with the Tachi, there are two different forging methods. with a long sword, you have a blade on both sides of the sword. And how that is accomplished is usually on a single-edged sword, all the metal that would make up the spine of the blade is then drawn out into a second edge. So, in actuality, the European longsword is actually, I would think, a little more, I would think it to be a little lighter than the Tachi. Like, in the hand, it would feel a little lighter than the Tachi. But, I could actually see them using the longsword dual-wielded. UPS. I can actually see the them using the longsword dual-wielded to an extent, but I think it would be predominantly two-handed use. So with that in mind, longsword definitely a two-handed use. Now, in European, you also have the bastard sword. That's kind of like, it's a sword in between the arming sword and the long sword. In my opinion, a bastard sword is it has an arming sword blade, but a long sword's grip. In my opinion, that's what constitutes a bastard sword. So they could easily dual wield those quite effortlessly. Then you also have the longsword, as I mentioned before, just like the Tachi. Some single-handed use, some maybe dual-wielded use, but predominantly two-handed. Then you get into the great swords like the German Zweihander, and then there's also the Scottish Claymore. Excuse my bad Scottish accent. I'm much rather better at doing the Irish. And my German isn't too bad either. I probably just insulted both cultures, but I tried. But in any case, with that in mind, I have both German and Irish in me, so I can insult the cultures, so. Yeah. Like, I don't know. It's like, I have no clue anymore. I'm just talking about Predator swords and drinking coffee. This is a normal day for any of us who are nerds, and otakus, and rednecks, and just love sci-fi movies. But in any case, with that in mind, I would think that the Yautja or the Predator would use the Claymore or the Zweihander, just like the Nodachi, dedicated two-handed use, just for their size and their weight. Like, the sword, a Zweihander and a Claymore, I would put into the ballpark of 5 to 6 pounds, which to a Yautja, they would be able to use it longer without tiring than a human would. But that's what I would say overall. Now, time for the conclusion of that. What European swords would I see a Yautja and a Yautja using the most? Well, I would have to say, oh, I forgot to mention this, the war sword. In terms of the European swords, I think the war sword would be the perfect blade overall for a Yautja to use. In European sword use. My opinion of Oriental, gotta give it to the Tachi overall for Japanese swords and Oriental blades overall. But in overall European swords, the war sword. And for those of you who don't know what a war sword is, a war sword is the biggest and heaviest form of a long sword you can have before becoming a great sword. So it's basically the standard long sword, just a little longer, just maybe about 4 or 5 inches longer, and about maybe half a pound heavier, or a few ounces heavier. But yeah, I would really think that the war sword overall, in European sense, that would be the best sword for the Yautja or the Predator to use. And what I would like, now it's time for the final conclusion. Final conclusion for Oriental sword use. Japanese tachi. Final conclusion for European sword use. European war sword. But, haha, there's one other sword that I have purposely left out because I wanted to talk about this solo. My favorite European sword overall. The Kriegsmesser. And for those of you who don't know what a Kriegsmesser is, it means war knife. Yes, the Germans in the Renaissance era made a sword that they classified as a knife. Okay? And that was because of the whole fact that back then a sword in Europe was classified that if the tang was peened over a pommel, then it was a sword. If the handle was made out of wooden scales and riveted, then it was a knife. So with that in mind, the German knife guilds were like, hey, let's make this let's make this obviously a sword, but because of its construction, we can call it a knife. And that's what they did. And they got away with it because the law back then was not very clear on what constitutes a sword. Again, Shadiversity, he did a lot of these videos, so I'm getting my information from him on ancient German sword laws. But in any case, with that in mind, overall, and this even means I'd like to see a Yautja use a Kriegsmesser even more than I'd like to see it use dual-wielding katana, or tachi, or dual-wielding arming sword, or long sword, or nodachi, war sword, claymore, Zweihander. I'd like to see him use a Kriegsmesser overall. Okay, because I feel like the Kriegsmesser, that would just perfectly match the Yautja. I mean, you have a blade that is long, wide, and perfectly designed to cut through bodies, okay? The Kriegsmesser, if you've never seen one, is basically a katana blade, but about twice as wide, same thickness, and about a foot longer. I think a Kriegsmesser's blade is relatively 2 3/4 inches wide by about maybe ½ inch thick at the base and then tapers to the tip. And those things cut like a mother effer. Like if you ever go and watch Scalagrim's review of the Albion Kriegsmesser, which I think has set the bar for any Kriegsmesser to come after it, you'll see what I'm talking about. That thing goes through shit like it wasn't even there. So, with that in mind, overall, the swords that I would most think would suit a Predator in these scenarios: dual wielding, Japanese katana, or European arming sword. Single-handed use, but also can be used in dual hand, but can also in some scenarios be dual wielded. Japanese tachi and European longsword. Well, I also should throw in bastard sword into the dual-handed category as well, so there's that. Dedicated two-handed sword. Nodachi and Odachi. Should have mentioned that before. And Claymore and Zweihander. Now, there's also I should also say the Kriegsmesser, it falls right into the category dedicated two-handed use. It's like the Kriegsmesser, it, along with the war sword, they kind of fall into their own category of two-handed use, but also they're like, I'd also want to give like the war sword and the Kriegsmesser their own categories, because those are my two favorite European swords. So the war sword, I'm going to call this category the dual use category. And what I mean by that is these can be either used one-handed they can occasionally be used one-handed in combination with a wrist blade, or they can be predominantly used two hands by two-handed and the wrist blade being a backup. Now, throughout this whole video, I always intended for the wrist blade to be a backup weapon, so I would think that overall, the swords, in my final conclusion, that a Yautja would be most comfortable using are the Tachi, the European longsword, the European war sword, the Kriegsmesser, and the Oriental Nodachi. And I wanted to throw the Nodachi in there just because I personally like Nodachis. But in any case, with that in mind, I really do believe that any one of those 4 or 5 swords I just mentioned would make very good use to a predator. They are designed to fight, they are designed to cut, and they are designed to kill. And they would be very effective against a xenomorph as well. But, yeah. Well, if you've stuck around this long, I just took up 37 minutes of your day. So, I hope you found my, my bitchings and ramblings, helpful. If you like this video, I guess hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Help me get more subscribers if you have a mind and a notion to. I'm not going to stand here and ask, like, beg you or anything. It's just, I guess, I don't know, like, this is basically the part where I'm just rambling, but if you did like this video, I do kindly ask you to at least hit the like button, maybe subscribe if you liked it, if you want to see more of my content, hit the notification bell, like the video, share it on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever the hell kind of social media is popular now. Like, I know I have Facebook, but yeah, that's basically all I got. So until next time, my noble band of outlaws, Outlaw Samurai tells all y'all, be crazy rednecks, be safe when using your weapons, and I'm out. Peace. You really think I would have left the video off without cutting something, did you? Now I'm out. Peace.